Godzilla Minus One is one of the top performing films at the box office over the past couple of weeks. However, it doesn't have as big as a box office as what you would expect from maybe the most recent MonsterVerse films, such as Godzilla versus Kong, or even what we would expect with Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire. However, the film is still a success, and we're going to explain that. We're going to explain why it is a success, and I'm going to be joined by special guest OMB Reviews, aka Odin. So let's welcome him into the show here. It's good to see you, Odin. Thank you for joining us to talk Godzilla Minus One. You are our box office expert.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this topic. I'm also, according to some, a shill for this movie, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Oh, don't worry, I am as well. We have another video that we did with John De La Rose where we talked about why we need to emulate this film because of its excellent messaging and themes, and how it is a film that we can win the culture war with if we kind of follow its example. But that's a topic for another day. We're here to talk about the box office, and we have this over at the numbers. The film has grossed nearly 50 million worldwide. As I said, that's not what we would expect for maybe a film like Godzilla versus Kong or the upcoming Godzilla X Kong the New Empire, and then even films that it's kind of competing with, like with the Marvels. I think the Marvels already has. I haven't looked at it recently, but I think it's closing in on maybe that 200 million mark. Maybe has just kind of passed it. So obviously that's not a big number, but this film is still a success at the box office, and I want to get your take as to why it is. Why is this film such a success, even though it's not maybe hitting those bigger numbers such as the Marvels?
Oh, absolutely, and it really comes down to like a couple of factors. So, for one, budget, right? This that's kind of the big story with most modern Hollywood movies, right? Is that because they spend so much money on these films, even if they make $400+ million, they're still either at best breaking even barely, and in most likely situations at 400 million with a $200 million budget, they're losing quite a bit of money on that. That's not the case at all with Godzilla, right? With Godzilla Minus One, the projected budget is 15 million or less, right? As that seems to indicate there, which could also mean even better for it. But also, we have to recognize that with that smaller budget, it means it's already at 49 million made money. It's already starting to make its profit. And especially with the fact that Lord knows the marketing campaign for this movie probably not nearly as robust as what a typical Disney film would get or a typical $100+ million film would be getting. And so the fact that it's doing this mostly by word of mouth, mostly by just fan reaction, is very impressive. And the other factor as to why this is impressive, not just again what its budget is compared to what it's made. Right now it's around 3 times its budget. For comparison on that last point, I'll mention that Godzilla versus Kong, right? And that's the last MonsterVerse film. Not a big fan of the MonsterVerse myself, but even that film, which made $467 million, because it cost around $155 million, it only made around 3.0 times its budget. So this movie, Godzilla Minus One, has already made times its budget more than what Godzilla Minus Kong made. And the profits for Godzilla Minus Kong were estimated to be around $48 million based off typical standards. And the fact that Godzilla Minus One's already at $7 million in profits means that there's a chance the film might make as much, if not more, than what the bigger overall movie made. That's why budgets are so important. And that second factor that I kept bringing up is the fact that this movie is a film in Japanese. So the fact that it's doing as well in America, North America especially, and it's a Japanese film with subtitles is also what's most impressive, right? This is a movie winning that daily battle, right? It's the number one film on a lot of these weekdays. It actually has beaten out films like Hunger Games, for instance, on several occasions, even starting as early as last week. And if you compare that to, and just kind of another showcase of this, there's a new film out called The Boy and the Heron. This is the newest Miyazaki film, and that film's around 90 million worldwide right now. And some might say, well, if Godzilla is so good, why isn't it even beating The Boy and the Heron? And I honestly think a big part of it is because, well, Boy and the Heron has two things, right? It has not only the Japanese film that hardcore anime fans, hardcore Miyazaki fans are going to want to see with the English subtitles, but it also has a dubbed version. And that, I think, is the big distinction here of why, in the case of these two films, one's doing better, but also why this film making 50 million already with the small budget, small marketing, and also the fact that it's a film most Americans aren't going to want to see just because, again, of that language barrier. Those are all factors as to why this is very impressive.
Yeah, and I know you talked about the standard protocols. Can you kind of explain what those are? I know we're going to get a little bit wonky here, but what are those kind of standards that we see from the film side? What are the theatrical cuts? What do we expect? Why do we say that it's a 2.5 times factor for a film to break even based on its production budget? Can
Yeah,
you explain that
absolutely.
to us a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, there are different metrics out there. You know, shout out to, of course, WW Pro and to Valiant Renegade, who I know also use some different metrics. But essentially, what I've found through the years I've been covering this now is that in general, a film or a studio will spend whatever its budget is. You multiply that by 1.5, right? So a $200 million movie typically will spend about an extra $100 million on marketing. And we know that in today's world, it usually is more from these bigger studios, right? So it used to be that 1.5 times the budget was a total spend number. So a $200 million budgeted film probably costs $300 million, right? As far as the actual total cost with marketing. But there are now a lot of films today where we get reports directly about the individual marketing costs. And so there's now movies that spend an extra 50 on top of that. So instead of spending 100 million, now they're spending 150 just on marketing alone. So that's a major factor when it comes to that. So 1.5 times the budget typically is what your total cost is with budget and with marketing. Then you get into the take. And this is the reason why also some would say, well, if the film cost $200 million and it made $200 million, how is that not a success? Because the studios don't get 100% of the profits. They have to split that with the theaters. And when I was working in the theaters, you know, I worked at a theater for 3 years. I actually got into the marketing department and took care of that. And so I got to see behind the scenes emails of how a lot of booking worked, got to talk to our GM about what typically we would get from a lot of movie tickets, especially opening weekend. And all in all, it figured that we see studios get roughly 60%, or at least prior to COVID, this is, I think, the big distinction, 60% of the entire box office. Theaters get around 40%. There's some that say it's closer to 50-50. I think it's probably somewhere maybe in the middle. Either way, if you look at my numbers as being a more conservative estimate about what a movie's making, meaning the smallest amount of profit, or sorry, the smallest loss, you could say, it makes these losses even worse, right? Because some would say it's you know, potentially even worse in that way. But yeah, 60-40 is about the split you tend to see. So that's why also a $15 million budget means your spend is less, your marketing is less. And since the split's going to also potentially be different because different countries have different cuts also, right? That's when you get into a whole other can of worms is, you know, in China, you only get 25% as a studio of the box office. When you're in other countries, it's usually on average 40%. So you get a lot less in those markets. So with this film having primarily most of its money from Japan, they're probably getting a decent return on investment there. And then they're probably getting a typical split here. So that's also why the film is doing very well for its budget.
Yeah, one of the things I also really wanted to talk about is just how well the legs are with this film. I think it was actually supposed to pretty much end its run. I know when I was looking at show times, it was gonna stop on like December 7th, and
Mm-hmm.
they obviously extended that past, and now we're seeing its second weekend. It only dropped 25% from its first weekend, and we don't usually see those kind of declines. Usually they're a lot higher when we're looking at a Marvel film. They usually range between like 55 to 65. Obviously, things with like the Marvels and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania were getting up towards 80% or even higher. So, what do you think this says about the film and how well it will do moving forward?
Yeah, and the other thing to add to that one is it had that quarter drop, like 25% drop after adding over 200 screens. So to have a drop like that when you're adding screens also is very impressive, especially when you're a smaller movie, because the number of screens can definitely, you know, lessen your per theater ratio. And so the fact that its per theater ratio is not too different from week 1 to week 2 is also impressive. It's showing us that this film is getting a lot of attention, that word of mouth is spreading. And even though, as I said, it's not doing these crazy billion-dollar film levels, because it is doing well in their individual theaters, that means that we're seeing more people than maybe ever before in history, as far as North American audiences, seeing a strictly Japanese movie. And I think that that is something that really needs to be pushed home, is that, again, a lot of times when we get foreign releases, there's usually some dubbed version of it, right? There's usually an option at least for that. So for this to not really have that, to my knowledge, I don't think there's a dubbed version of this movie
I
out
haven't seen
there.
one.
You haven't seen one either? Yeah. So that makes it even more impressive, because that means you have to read. And if you're going to be honest about, modern society and American society, people don't necessarily want to go to a movie to have to read something, right? But kind of getting back to that day-to-day performance and the numbers that we're seeing, and specifically that story that came out about it leaving theaters. That's actually how all movies work. People don't realize this, that when a movie is being booked, it's always week to week. But when you are a major studio, you already have in your mind, okay, we're going to have this film out in theaters for a month, two, like however long it's going to last. But usually, at least they have the first 2 to 4 weeks kind of in mind of what they think the numbers are going to be. And depending on how they hit their marks, they'll reduce some theaters, or they'll continue the same levels, or they'll add it here or there. But that's how all studios work. And so when that story came around saying the movie's leaving theaters because they only planned on it being there for a week, and it's like, well, I think it was that they were going to take it week to week, day to day, but then when they realized how well it did, they said, oh, well, now we can extend it another week. So that's actually how all studios work. It's just that if you have a major movie, like Wish, for instance, they suspected the film was going to do okay, did not expect probably that it would be doing as bad as that film is doing, but they're still week to week too. So it's just interesting because all studios do that. It's just that obviously for them, they did not think the American audience was going to show up as well, or as much. And so, therefore, it looked like they were not going to be there as long. But that's another important thing is also typically on Tuesday afternoons to Wednesday afternoons is when theaters actually put out their show times for the next week. So if you don't see a movie and it's the Tuesday, guess what? You're probably not going to see a lot of movies there. You might see new releases listed with show times because those get priority, but you're most likely not going to have a full slate of films as far as the weekend schedule of what's staying until that Wednesday before. So that's the other thing that people sometimes also don't realize.
So, what do you expect to see this film doing as it continues? How much do you think it's going to do? Obviously, we saw only a 25% drop here in the second weekend. We're seeing kind of similar declines. Looking at the dailies, like December 10th, 11% drop from was that previous Monday, I believe, and then only a 27% drop from previous. I guess that was Sunday. So the 11th, I think, is the Monday. 27% drop from that Monday. The previous Monday, obviously, what is that? 66% drop from Sunday, but still really good declines there, even looking at the dailies. So where do you see this film kind of going? Where do you think it peaks at? What do you think it gets to? Say what we're at. We're at 50 million total right now. Do you say it gets to 50 million total in the U.S. Before it ends?
I mean, these are the kinds of movies that always frustrate me because they're always the hardest to track because it's purely based on word of mouth. And because it's a smaller studio and a foreign studio at that making the decisions, who knows how long this film is going to last. It seems like their mindset is, hey, as long as it continues to pull the money that it is, we're going to keep pushing it out there. So, yeah, I can see that happening. And I'm actually more interested to see the worldwide totals. I think it still has yet to release in a few countries. I think that they are planning it to be released in other countries, not major markets, to my knowledge, that would make a huge difference. But it's based on typical trends, and keep in mind that the stats that I use, so for those that don't know, I use a historical trends to make predictions and projections on films. And it's because what I found, and this is when I started my first initial coverage of box office, started back when Solo: A Star Wars Story came out. And I started doing research and I looked at all of these films and all the data available. And what I found was most movies tend to make 50 to 70% of their entire box office in their first 2 weeks. So then using that, I was able to do some reverse math, and that's where it just gets too crazy for even me sometimes, and to figure out, okay, what would that look like, right? So if a film doubled its box office after the first 2 weeks, that would be a 50% number for its first two, right? And, that would be a very good hold typically. And then the worst holds would be somewhere around 60 or 70. Using that, but reminding everyone that that's, again, historical trends, and also because this film had an early release in Japan, it means that the numbers are front loaded, right? That number's already baked in, as it were. But if we saw this film have the release that other films tend to have, where they're all coming out around the same time, you're looking at it being somewhere, based on what it's made so far, between 68 and maybe 100 million worldwide. So I think 100 million's on the table. It'll be interesting to see where it goes, though. If I had to say my gut, I think 75 to 100 sounds about right to me worldwide. And then domestically, that's one that I have not been following nearly as much. But I definitely think that there is a lot to be said for this film being able to continue to push probably into the 40s, I could see.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here at the Trent Report, providing your insight. You are the box office expert, and I'm glad we were able to break down why Godzilla is so successful, despite it only having a $50 million worldwide box office gross now. So, thank you so much for joining us, and we will definitely have you back in the future.
Thank you for having me.